Revenge Office Stories. The conference room was packed, and every single eye was on me. My boss, a smug grin plastered on her face, said the words that blew up my life. "You're fired. Pack your things." She thought she'd won. She thought she'd shut me up for good. What she didn't know was that she had just lit a fuse. This is the story of how a humiliating public firing led to the downfall of a corrupt executive and turned me into an accidental hero. It wasn't just a job. For 8 years, Sterling Financial had been my world. I was 36, a senior project analyst, and I was damn good at my job. I wasn't just another number. I was the person they called when a multi-million-dollar project was about to go up in flames. I was the one pulling all-nighters, untangling complex data, finding the tiny errors everyone else missed, and making sure clients and shareholders were getting the truth. My performance reviews weren't just good, they were glowing. I was on the fast track, or so I thought. My loyalty wasn't to a logo, it was to the work itself. I believed in the system. I thought competence and hard work actually meant something. Looking back, I was unbelievably naive. My boss was a woman named Karen. Okay, not her real name, but if you've ever worked in an office, you know a Karen. She was a master of corporate politics, the kind of person who could take credit for a sunny day and blame an intern for a thunderstorm. She had this chilling ability to look you right in the eye and lie without even a flicker of her smile. She climbed the ladder not on her own merit, but on the backs of people like me. I'd seen her do it to others. A colleague would share a brilliant idea, and by the time it got to the VPs, it was Karen's brilliant idea. A project would hit a snag, and the person in charge would suddenly get sidelined and shamed in a brutal email chain, while Karen swooped in to save the day, which usually just meant repackaging the original solution. We all knew. We all saw it. But in the cutthroat world of finance, you learn to keep your head down. It's not your fight. Do good work and you'll be safe. That was mistake number 2. My last project was a beast, a complete overhaul of our risk assessment protocols for a new investment portfolio. The deadline was a joke, the data was a complete disaster, and 2 key team members had already quit, worn down by Karen's relentless pressure. I inherited a dumpster fire. For 6 weeks, I barely saw daylight. I was fueled by lukewarm coffee and stale office donuts. I rebuilt the entire analytical model from scratch, cross-referencing years of market data and working side by side with the tech team to fix bugs. Along the way, I found huge errors in the old system, vulnerabilities that could have cost the firm millions. I didn't just meet the deadline. I delivered a system that was smarter, faster, and safer than anything the company had ever used. I was proud. I thought for once my work was too big to be ignored, too solid to be stolen. I figured this project would be my shield. That was my biggest mistake. The presentation was in the main boardroom on the 45th floor. The big one. The one with the sweeping city views designed to make you feel like a master of the universe. All the regional VPs were there, plus the CFO himself, Mr. Davies. It was the biggest room I'd ever presented to. Karen, of course, kicked things off. She spent 10 minutes on her vision, her strategic oversight, and the leadership challenges she'd overcome. It was a masterclass in buzzwords: synergy, paradigm shift, proactive integration. I just stood there, heart pounding, waiting for my cue. "And now," she said, gesturing dramatically in my direction, "my senior analyst, Sarah, will walk you through the technical details." Just Sarah. Not the woman who saved this project. Just the tech support. I took a deep breath and started. I laid it all out, the architecture, the data models, the stress tests. I showed them the flaws in the old system and how the new one fixed them. I fielded their questions, from the simple to the deeply technical. The VPs were nodding along. Mr. Davies, the CFO, was leaning forward, asking sharp, insightful questions. He was impressed. I could feel the energy in the room changing. They got it. They saw what I had done. I saw a few of my teammates exchange proud little smiles. We'd pulled it off. When I finished the last slide, I felt a wave of relief. I glanced at Karen, expecting at least a nod, some sign of a shared win. Instead, her face was a mask of pure fury. Her smile was tight, her eyes like chips of ice. The room gave a polite round of applause. Mr. Davies stood up. "Excellent work," he said, looking right at me. "This is exactly the kind of rigorous, forward-thinking analysis we need. You've potentially saved this firm a great deal of money and reputational damage. Thank you, Sarah." And that was it. That was the exact moment my fate was sealed. He had praised me. He had seen me. In Karen's world, there was no bigger crime. She waited. She let his praise hang in the air for a second. She let me feel the warmth of it. And then she pounced. "Thank you, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "I'm so glad my team could execute my vision so effectively. But leadership is also about making difficult decisions for the future of the business." A confused silence fell over the room. My stomach felt like it was full of cement. She turned to face me, that sweet smile twisting into a predatory smirk. "Sarah," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "while your technical skills are adequate, your recent performance has shown a fundamental lack of team synergy and a resistance to strategic oversight. Your approach has been insubordinate, and you've created a siloed, uncooperative environment." I just stared at her, completely floored. The words didn't even make sense. Insubordinate? I'd done nothing but work. Uncooperative? I held the whole team together. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I was frozen by the sheer audacity of it all. "We are moving in a new strategic direction," she went on, clearly enjoying the show. "And unfortunately, your skill set is no longer a fit for the dynamic, agile team we are building. Therefore, we are terminating your employment, effective immediately. You're fired. Pack your things." The silence was deafening. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Every single eye was on me. I felt my face flush with a deep, burning shame that felt like a punch to the gut. I saw pity in my teammates' eyes. I saw discomfort on the VP's faces. Mr. Davies looked completely stunned, his mouth hanging open slightly. But nobody said a word. Karen just stood there, arms crossed, with that smug, triumphant grin. She hadn't just fired me. She had executed me. She had turned my biggest professional achievement into a public crucifixion, a warning to anyone else who dared outshine her. I don't remember walking out of that boardroom. The next thing I clearly remember is standing at my desk, holding a cardboard box, while a security guard watched me pack 8 years of my life. My photos, my stupid coffee mug, the little awards I'd won. My colleagues stared intently at their screens, pretending I didn't exist. They were scared. I got it. Karen had made her point loud and clear. The walk out of that office was the longest walk of my life. Every step was a new wave of humiliation. The security escort, the whispers that died as I walked past, the final whoosh of the glass doors sliding shut behind me. I stood on the sidewalk in the middle of a busy afternoon, holding a box of my life, and I had never felt so alone. Then, the shock started to wear off, replaced by a cold, hard knot of rage in my stomach. She thought she had won. She thought she'd just thrown me away like trash. But as I stood there, a new thought started to take shape. A promise. She didn't know it yet, but she hadn't just fired an employee. She had created an enemy. And I wasn't just going to get even. I was going to get justice. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in my small apartment, the cardboard box on my coffee table like a tiny tombstone. The humiliation replayed in my head on a loop. Karen's smirk, the shocked faces, the crushing silence. The rage was still there, burning hot. But underneath it, a question started to bug me. Why? It couldn't just be her ego. This was too extreme, too public. Firing a top performer right after the CFO praised her? That's career suicide. It made no sense. Unless the risk of keeping me was even greater than the risk of firing me. Unless I knew something I didn't even realize I knew. My mind raced back over the project, the data, the numbers, the spreadsheets. I'd been so focused on fixing the risk model that I hadn't looked too closely at the portfolio's underlying finances. But I remembered feeling like something was off. Little inconsistencies, payments to vendors I'd never heard of, expense authorizations that seemed way too high. At the time, I'd brushed them off as clerical errors. I had a deadline, and my job was to fix the model, not audit the books. But now, those little red flags started connecting. The next morning, the fog of shock cleared, and a cold, methodical resolve took its place. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was a puzzle, and I was going to solve it. My first move was to check my personal laptop. I had a habit of saving working drafts to a personal cloud drive, just in case the company network ever went down. It was technically against the rules, but everyone did it. My heart pounded as I logged in. And there it was. Project Titan. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. It had weeks of raw data, my draft models, and, most importantly, copies of the vendor payment authorizations I had flagged to look at later. I opened the first file, a vendor named Innovatech Solutions, LLC. Never heard of them. The invoice was for a neat $250,000. The description was pure corporate gibberish, synergistic consulting, and strategic implementation. The authorization was signed by just one person, Karen. That was strange. A payment that big should have had two signatures. I started digging. Public business registries showed that Innovatech Solutions, LLC, was a real company, registered about 18 months ago. The address was a residential house in the suburbs. There was no website, no LinkedIn, no digital footprint at all. I used a public records database to look up the owner of the house. The name was unfamiliar, but a quick social media search turned up his profile. It was private, but his profile picture showed him at a barbecue, standing next to another man. I zoomed in. My blood ran cold. It was Karen's husband. That's when I knew. This wasn't ego. This was fraud. Innovatech Solutions was a shell company. Karen was approving fake invoices to a company secretly owned by her own family. She was bleeding the company dry, and I had accidentally stumbled right into it. The new risk model I built would have eventually flagged these insane expenses. My insubordination wasn't about my attitude. It was about me getting too close. Firing me so publicly wasn't just cruel. It was a desperate, panicked move to discredit me. She wanted to make sure that if I ever tried to talk, I'd just sound like a bitter ex-employee with an axe to grind. The next few weeks were a blur. I became a forensic accountant operating out of my living room. I spent my days at cafes with public Wi-Fi, my laptop angled away from prying eyes. I lived and breathed the investigation. I found two more shell companies, both with a similar pattern. Vague invoices, Karen's solo signature, and addresses that led back to her relatives. It was a web of corruption, and I was mapping every single thread. By the time I was done, I could trace at least $3 million that had been siphoned out of the company over 2 years. But having the data wasn't enough. I needed to know the law. I went down a rabbit hole of corporate governance regulations. That's when I learned about the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or SOX. It was a law passed after huge scandals like Enron, designed specifically to protect shareholders from this exact kind of fraud. And Section 806 of the Act specifically protects employees who report it. It makes it illegal to retaliate by firing, demoting, or harassing a whistleblower. A 2024 Supreme Court ruling in Murray v. UBS Securities, LLC even clarified that a whistleblower doesn't need to prove their boss had retaliatory intent. They just have to show that their whistleblowing was a contributing factor in them being fired. My case was a textbook example. Then I found the Dodd-Frank Act. This was the real weapon. Passed after the 2008 financial crisis, it created a formal whistleblower program run by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. It allows whistleblowers to report securities fraud directly to the SEC And if the tip leads to a successful enforcement action over $1 million, the whistleblower can get an award of 10 to 30% of the money collected. But there was a critical catch clarified by the Supreme Court in a case called Digital Realty Trust Incorporated v. Summers to get the full anti-retaliation protections and be eligible for an award under Dodd-Frank. You have to report it to the SEC, not just internally. This was my path. This was the blueprint. This wasn't about Karen anymore. This was about making sure everyone knew what she did. But I couldn't do it alone. The internet is full of horror stories about whistleblowers who got crushed by corporate law firms. I needed a professional. Finding a whistleblower attorney was like bad online dating. I had a few awkward calls with lawyers who just wanted a quick, easy settlement. They weren't interested in the fraud. They just saw a simple retaliation claim. I didn't want a settlement. I wanted to burn it all down. Then I found Mr. Evans. He was a former federal prosecutor who now specialized in SEC whistleblower cases. He was older, with a calm, deliberate way of speaking that just radiated confidence. I laid out everything. My spreadsheet, the shell companies, the social media screenshots. I expected him to be skeptical. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and a slow grin spread across his face. "Ms. Miller," he said, "this is one of the most well-documented, slam-dunk cases of corporate fraud I have ever seen walk through my door. You haven't just found smoke. You've brought me the arsonist, the gasoline can, and the receipts." For the first time in months, I felt like I could actually breathe. He explained we had 2 fights ahead. First, the SOX retaliation claim, which had to be filed with the Department of Labor within 180 days of my firing. Second, the big one, the SEC whistleblower tip. He stressed that my saved files and investigation were exactly the kind of original information they needed. We would file anonymously through his office to protect my identity for as long as possible. We spent the next month putting together our submission to the SEC. It was a nearly 100-page masterpiece of righteous fury, complete with my analysis, the fake invoices, the corporate records, and a detailed narrative of Karen's scheme. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after I was fired, we hit send. The silent war was over. The first shots had just been fired. Now, all I could do was wait for the explosion. The waiting was agony. The wheels of federal justice turn at a glacial pace, and for months, all I heard was silence. My savings were disappearing. Recruiters who used to blow up my phone now wouldn't even return my calls. Karen's insubordinate story had gotten around. She had successfully poisoned the well. I was radioactive. There were dark days when I was sure I'd thrown away my career for nothing, that my bombshell report was buried in some government slush pile. Mr. Evans kept me sane, reminding me that the SEC process is confidential and can take years. The first sign that something was happening came as a whisper, a call from an old colleague on the tech team. He sounded terrified. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "something weird is going on. A bunch of people from the SEC's enforcement division showed up this morning. They took over the main boardroom. They have a formal order of investigation. IT is on lockdown, and they're interviewing people one by one. Davies is in there right now. Karen looks like she's seen a ghost." My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. The SEC doesn't show up on site unless they have something serious. They had my evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, the furtive calls kept coming. The atmosphere at Sterling Financial had gone from a political snake pit to a paranoid police state. Lawyers were swarming the place. No one was allowed to delete anything. Word was Karen had been put on administrative leave, the corporate version of being sent to your room. Mr. Davies had just stopped showing up entirely. The rumor was he was cooperating. The end didn't come with a single bang, but with a slow, cascading demolition. The final blow was a press release from Sterling Financial, issued before the market opened on a Monday morning. The headline was sterile corporate speak. Sterling Financial announces executive departures and internal review. But the details were a kill shot. It announced the immediate termination of Karen for violation of the company's code of conduct and ethics policies. It also announced the resignation of the CFO, Mr. Davies, to pursue other opportunities. The release stated the company was fully cooperating with an SEC investigation and that its own internal audit had uncovered financial irregularities. They were even restating their earnings for the past 2 years. I read it over and over, the words blurring through tears. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, undiluted vindication. I did it. I tore down the whole rotten structure from the outside. The financial news media pounced. Fraud scandal rocks, Sterling Financial. One headline screamed. Executive fired, CFO resigns amidst SEC probe, read another. They laid out the whole story. The shell companies, the fake invoices, the family connections. My late nights of digging were now the official record of her downfall. She wasn't just fired. Her name was toxic, and she and her husband were now facing serious criminal charges. With the fraud now public, my retaliation claim suddenly had massive leverage. The company's lawyers, who would have loved to drag me through the mud, were now desperate to settle. They did not want a public trial featuring me, the heroic whistleblower, testifying about the culture of fear that let this happen. Mr. Evans was ruthless in the negotiations. He pointed to the massive settlements in other retaliation cases, like the millions Wells Fargo was ordered to pay managers who were fired after reporting fraud. He even brought up a recent landmark case where an executive, Carlos Ornoza, secured a record-breaking $4.5 million settlement in a SOX retaliation lawsuit against SunEdison subsidiaries, showing just how seriously these claims are taken. The company caved. They settled. The amount is confidential, but it was enough to cover every sleepless night, every ounce of humiliation, and every dollar of lost income, and then some. It was life-changing, but it was never about the money. It was about them having to write a check that said, "We were wrong." My story could have ended with me as just another casualty of corporate politics, chewed up and spit out by a toxic boss. But because I refused to be silent, justice was served. If you think justice was served cold, do me a favor and hit that like button. And if you want to hear more stories of boardroom takedowns and corporate justice, make sure you subscribe. The aftermath was surreal. The SEC's action against Sterling Financial ended in a massive fine for the company. Because my information led directly to their successful enforcement, a percentage of that fine was allocated to the Whistleblower Award program. About a year later, a letter from the SEC arrived. The award was staggering. Looking at the number on that check, I just had to laugh. In her blind arrogance, Karen tried to ruin my life. Instead, she accidentally made me a millionaire. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was the change that came after. Sterling Financial was forced to completely overhaul its compliance programs. They brought in a third party to manage a new, truly anonymous whistleblower hotline. They implemented mandatory ethics training for all managers. My very personal fight for justice ended up protecting every single person still working there. I had become an accidental hero. I never went back to corporate finance. That world had shown me its dark side. I took some time off. I traveled, I healed. Now I work as a consultant for whistleblower advocacy groups, helping people who find themselves in that same terrifying place I was. It all started because one woman thought she could break me in a conference room. She thought humiliation was a weapon that would guarantee my silence. But what she didn't get is that when you push someone with nothing left to lose, you don't break them. You make them fearless. It started with them trying to ruin my career, but it ended with me exposing their corruption. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other Karens are out there thinking they're untouchable? And who's going to be the one to finally hold them accountable?